There is more love somewhere. That's why the worst part of being homeless, it's not the hunger, it's not the sleep deprivation or the bugs and infections, but the isolation and the loneliness. The worst part is not being seen even when you're in public. It's no one knowing your name, no one caring about you. It's the way people look at you and wish you were somewhere else. It's written, I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. When I had no place to lay my head, you took me in. When I was under the underpass, you did not forget about me. When I was picking around the dumpsters, you did not judge me. When I was pushing around shopping carts full of my possessions, it mattered to you. In honor of this summer's theme, Trading Places, I spent 24 hours this week on the streets of Tulsa with the homeless, living as if homeless, and spending the night in the day center for the homeless. I wore these clothes and this backpack, and I walked the streets and walked into the day center, not knowing what to expect. They asked me to show some form of ID and then walk through a metal detector. And the person at the counter then asked a man to show me where I could get a mat to sleep on. And he took me over and showed me a place on the cement floor between two other men where I could put my mat and sleep that night. It was the men's section, the men's half of the day center, which was divided from the women's half, where the women sleep, by some folded tables. As I approached the day center, I saw that there were a few people taping cardboard to the front door, and another was sweeping up glass shards. I learned that a man had come in about 20 minutes before I arrived, and he was strung out on drugs, apparently. He became violent, and in his violence and raging, he broke the front door. The security guard pepper sprayed him and tried to get him under control before the police came and arrested him and took him to jail. It had already been an eventful day, it turns out, at the center, as an elderly woman who was living there, who has emphysema and uses oxygen to breathe. She was intubated and taken out on a stretcher, and the residents there felt that they would likely not see her again. I proceeded to lay down my 2-inch thick green plastic mat between two other men who were already asleep at 7 p.m. in the evening. There was about 10 inches between each of our mats. So through the course of the night, we became well acquainted with the smells of each other's bodies and breath, the sounds of each other's snoring and coughing and rolling over. I think I probably got 3 hours of sleep, broken up, if I'm lucky. It's a big open space. There's over 100 people lying on the floor, on these mats, hacking and snoring and getting up to go to the bathroom. Many people there smoke. I was told that by the residents, that everyone seems to get a chest infection when they first arrive. You're required, if you stay there more than 3 days, to get a TB test and to have a card that shows that you're not a carrier of tuberculosis. There's a whole cottage industry of people buying cheap pipe tobacco for about $12 a pound and chopping it up and rolling it into cigarettes and selling them. The most desperate, though, pick up cigarettes off the, cigarette butts off the ground or out of the ashtrays, and they empty what's left of the tobacco and then roll it up in a store receipt and smoke it. As coffee starts being brewed about 5 a.m., the place begins to come alive. At 6 a.m., the lights come on, and we're instructed to get up and put away our mats. By 7:30, the people who slept at the Salvation Army and others from the streets start flooding in to spend the day, perhaps to see a caseworker or to get out of the heat or to see a doctor or to get their mail or to receive legal services or to try to get their disability insurance. A few families with small children came during the day to get inside into safety and out of the heat. People who just needed to get out of their cars where it was way too hot and cramped on a 95-degree day here in Tulsa. I could fill a book with all of the stories and observations that I had, but in the interest of time this morning, I want to just share some of my biggest takeaways. It was a tremendous experience. I met fascinating and kind and resourceful people. When it was over, I didn't want to go back to the world where these people are forgotten and misunderstood, despised, and looked down upon. I'd been immersed in an experience of humanity and humility and hospitality. People were wonderful to me. They saw that I was new around there, and they offered to show me the ropes, to show me where in town to get food and snacks and free clothes and a backpack if I needed it and more. They gave me advice like travel in pairs, and above all else, make sure you have someone to watch your stuff if you ever have to leave it for a few moments. I was told not to burn any bridges with people because you don't need any enemies out here. Besides my appearance, I never had to lie because no one ever asked me any questions about myself. Except, what's your name? Are you new around here? And where's your accent from? Yet as I inquired about other people's lives and their situations, people seemed eager to share. And the stories were humble and heartfelt. I met people who were abused, addicted, neglected, molested, travelers, the tired, the weary, the hopeful, and the hopeless. In one day and night, in and around the shelter, I met a man who lost his foot in a tractor accident at the age of 2, a man who lost his adult daughter to a drunk driver, a man whose wife became addicted to opioids after a simple surgery and eventually to heroin once her supply ran out. She lost her job and eventually they lost their home. She took off with the car and they lost their children. One man lost his wife of 20 years suddenly and unexpectedly on a Sunday morning. His grief and the PTSD from that gruesome scene set him on a bender, drinking for about 2 years. And he was just coming up for air and pulling his life back together. His faith taught him that if he committed suicide, that he would never see his wife again. And so he went out picking fights and trying to get somebody to kill him. He was pretty beat up. Another man who had worked in the oil fields for 42 years until he had a massive heart attack and then 4 more smaller heart attacks after that, which forced him to stop working. He ended up on the streets as he was waiting to get a disability check. For 6 weeks, he'd been living in a tent in a makeshift shelter down along the river until the recent floods came up and swept his shelter away. I heard a story of a woman who ran away from an abusive father at the age of 11. A father who went to prison for drug dealing at age 19 for 15 years. And he admitted that he's an addict and he hasn't been able to quit. There was an electrician who had accumulated debts and then got a DUI, and he lost his license to drive and to work as an electrician. When his brother kicked him out of the house, he came to the shelter where he's staying and trying to get his licenses back. I met Vietnam veterans and many others. The stories all contain some mix of addiction, mental illness, and/or physical illnesses. But the one thread that was woven through all of them were broken family relationships. A 75-year-old man who had a number of serious ailments said, "I do not want to die in here." He told me of 3 adult children, but apparently none of them could or would help him. He didn't say why. Every person I talked to talked about siblings or parents or children who they were estranged from. I believe a single common thread at the heart of homelessness is broken family relationships, often due to addiction, mental illness, or abuse. When families cannot help, that's where community comes in. What does community mean? Common unity. That we are all essentially the same and that no one is better than anyone else. It is our common humanity that reminds us that we are all vulnerable. We are all in need. And all of us are somewhere on the scale of human brokenness, whether we acknowledge it or not. One of the things that was so refreshing about being with our homeless siblings was that there's no pretense or delusion about anyone's brokenness. For many of us, our property, our power, and our possessions give us the illusion of security. But that's all it is. It's an illusion. One man told me about his wife who suddenly died in his arms, how she was struck down in the prime of life. Their life was going great, and there was no reason why she would die like this. He told me that he was so mad at God that he said things to and about God that he regrets, and he did things to himself and to others since then that made him think, there's no way I'll be going to heaven. And so he figured he'd never see his wife again. Then a month ago, in his grief, he overdosed and landed in the hospital. While he was there, his wife came to him in a dream and sat on his lap. He said the encounter was so real he could smell the unmistakable smell of her skin and her breath. She told him, "Stop trying to get someone to kill you. It's not fair to draw someone else into your nightmare." He woke up crying and knowing that he needed to turn his life around. So after almost 2 years on the streets, he sought help, and now he's on his way to recovery and a new chapter in his life. As we connected through some tears, I told him that I too had lost someone special to me suddenly and unexpectedly and in my arms. We bonded in our common suffering and loss and the vulnerability of being alive. He asked me what I thought about remarrying after the death of a spouse you love. He said every time he feels attracted to a woman, he feels like he's committing adultery on his deceased wife. I told him I'd thought about it. And I know that if I were to die young, I would want my wife to fall in love again, to have love in her life. I wouldn't want her to live out the last decades of her life all alone. And I believe she would want the same for me. It was one of many incredibly poignant conversations. There's something about being stripped of all of our things that also strips us of most of our pretenses. There's an astonishing intimacy in acknowledging our brokenness and sharing it with someone else, even with a stranger, because when we do, it takes away the strangeness and reminds us of our common unity. This is probably why I did not feel like going back home after the 24 hours were up. Even though my foray into the world of homelessness was very limited and profoundly compromised by the fact that I have a house and a job and a car, I knew that I would miss being with other people who had nothing of value in their possessions except their humanity and their dignity. They have nothing much to give except time and a smile. They know that they're vulnerable and they're broken, and they didn't try to hide it. And even though they clearly saw me as someone equally vulnerable and broken and with nothing to offer except maybe a cigarette or a story, they were open to sharing and caring. I kept thinking about the story of the prodigal son that Barbara read earlier, where there's a father who has two sons. One of them runs off and spends his inheritance on things that he should not do. He ends up eating trash and living among pigs. When he finally realizes that none of the things that he was chasing after were going to satisfy him or make him happy, he grasps that he needs help. So he returns to his father and he begs for forgiveness and asks for mercy and for a job. He said, I don't have to be your son. Just let me be one of your servants. His father welcomes him wholeheartedly and unconditionally back as his son. His older brother, on the other hand, rolls his eyes and turns his back. Now, I see aspects of both of these characters in myself. I know what it's like to feel ashamed of myself and to have really messed up and to have to ask for forgiveness and to need to rely on the mercy of someone else. I've also done my share of eye rolling and turning away, judging others. But one of the big differences between these two brothers is that one of them knows that he's broken and the other one does not. The older brother thinks he's good and righteous and deserving, and therefore he thinks his condemnation and his disregard is justified. The other brother is also lost. But unlike his sibling, he doesn't know it. I can relate to both of these attitudes in myself. My Trading Places experiment this week helped me become less of the older brother who turns away and judges my homeless siblings. It woke up some part of my humanity, some part of my vulnerability. It made me want to be more like the father in the story, the one who offers unconditional love and grace. How wonderful that is when we receive it. And how wonderful it is when we can give it. What I've come to see is that if we're ever going to come home to our full humanity, we'll have to let all of the people who we've distanced ourselves from into our hearts. I don't just mean homeless people, but anyone we distance ourselves from or put ourselves above. It could be through prejudice or pride or politics. It could be a family member or person who's just so different from who we are. We come home to our humanity only when we learn to accept our common unity and make community with others. We are all like the prodigal son, when we search for fulfillment and happiness where it cannot be found. It cannot be found in material things, in the accumulation of power and possessions and property, all of which we won't take with us when this life is over. We discover unconditional love when we are humble and when we begin giving unconditional love to others. I want to be someone who, when others are talking to me, they feel at home in my presence. Someone who, when people speak to me, they feel more alive than they did before. That's how it felt in these conversations with the people I encountered this week. They reminded me that the goal of life is not how much we possess or gain, but how much we care and give and love, even when we have nothing to gain. The goal of life is to become as fully human as we can. What I learned about our homeless siblings this week is that while some are chronically and permanently homeless, a lot of these folks have hit a bottom in their lives. They've hit a terrible place, and it's not permanent, or it doesn't have to be. They need some help. They need some time. They need a chance. If I ever hit a period where I've lost everything, and I'm confused or sick or both, and have nothing but a sidewalk to sleep on and a garbage bag to hold the few possessions I can carry, I know there are kind people who will give me a hand or a smile or a cigarette or a sandwich. I want to be one of those people for others in this transient world. I want to be a person who, when people meet me, they feel seen. I want you and all of the people of All Souls to be the kind of people who, when people meet us, they feel seen. They feel we respect their dignity and humanity and our common vulnerability. We are called to be people who invite strangers to put aside their strangeness and become friends. Because there is more love. There's more love right here. And there's more love right here and right there. I love you. Welcome home. Thank you.
You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, you'll do it 1,000 times again. Oh, you rise up in spite of the ache. You rise up in spite of the ache, over and over and over and over again. You rise. And all we need is hope. And for that we have each other. And for that we have each other. And we will rise, we will rise, we will rise again and again and again and again. And again, you rise up in spite of the ache. You rise up, and you'll do it 1,000 times, 1,000 times again. And again. Yes, you will. Love you all.
Hey, we're so happy you're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving, so please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
LOVEBB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256, or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed
and be a blessing.